Imagine being in the middle of a sun that is almost 40 degrees, with a dry mouth, your body shaking with weakness, and knowing that the only thing you have at that moment is a small bottle of water, your last one. Now, imagine looking to the side and seeing a lady, even weaker, passed out on the floor, with her eyes closed, on the verge of losing her life, and even with all the pain, all the hunger, and that empty stomach screaming, you choose to give your last drop to save someone you don't even know. That's exactly what Naomi did, a simple choice, but one that changed everything. What she had no idea was that someone was watching every detail, and that someone was none other than the most powerful man in that region, an African millionaire, who the next day appeared in the village in a way that left everyone open-mouthed. This is a story of overcoming, of public humiliation, of prejudice, of cruel judgment, but also of divine justice, of unexpected reward, and of a turnaround so shocking that to this day those who witnessed it have tears in their eyes. What Naomi experienced after that simple gesture is one of those things that makes us shiver, cry, and believe again that good things always come back. And look, what this millionaire did was so out of the ordinary, so unbelievable, that it changed not only her life, but the entire village. So stay here, because what you are about to see now is much more than a story. It is a life lesson, one of those that touches your soul, and that will make your heart beat faster from beginning to end. What happened that day? Naomi never imagined it would have such a big impact on her life. You know, that kind of moment that seems small and simple, but deep down carries a huge weight. Well, it was exactly like that. The scene was still fresh in her mind. The hot ground, the dry air as if it were breathing fire, her eyes burning from the sun and tiredness. Naomi walked, slowly, dragging her worn sandals. It was the third day in a row without finding a steady job, and the little food she had in her stomach was barely enough to stave off her hunger. Her pocket, empty, her strength, almost none. But the little bottle, that little bottle of water, was all she had left. She held it dearly as if it were a treasure. It wasn't just water, it was the guarantee of a few more minutes of staying on her feet. But then, as soon as she turned the corner of the central square, everything changed. In the middle of that absurd heat, there was a lady lying on the ground, her weak arms trying to support herself on the dirty wall, her breathing labored. It was clear that she was fainting, or very close to it. Naomi stopped right there. For a second, she even thought about ignoring it, continuing on her way, pretending she didn't see it. After all, who would blame her? She barely had the strength to take care of herself, let alone someone she didn't even know. But you know that voice that speaks softly inside us, the one that says, "Help, do your part, no matter what happens next." Well, that voice was the one that shouted the loudest at that moment. Naomi looked around. People were passing by. Some even sped up their pace so as not to get involved. Others pretended to be busy with their cell phones, as if it were invisible. But for her, she couldn't pretend. With shaking hands, she opened the cap of the bottle. For a second, she hesitated, stared at the little water that was left, and thought, if I give it to her, what will be left for me? But the answer came in the form of a quick, almost instinctive decision. Naomi knelt down next to the lady, and with all the care in the world, brought the bottle to her dry lips. The first reaction was almost non-existent. The lady could barely swallow, but after a few seconds, the color in her face began to return. Slowly, as if life was being returned drop by drop. Naomi, even though she was dying of thirst, remained there, holding the woman's head carefully, fanning her with her free hand, trying to provide some comfort. It wasn't easy. The heat was still suffocating. Sweat was running down her forehead. Naomi's throat felt like it was burning. It was so dry, but she didn't think about herself. She just wanted to make sure that the lady was going to be okay. And then, It was at that exact moment, while she was still kneeling on the floor, that the first comments began to appear. A group of young people who were sitting on a nearby bench started to laugh. One of them shouted mockingly, "Hey, Naomi, do you want to save the world now? You're going to die too, huh?" Another added, "She doesn't even have one for herself, and she still wants to play the heroine of a cheap soap opera." That hurt, but Naomi, with that calm demeanor as always, pretended not to hear. But inside, her heart had been broken for a long time. She knew what it was like to be singled out, judged. Since she was little, she had this feeling of not being enough, of always being below others. But even so, even with all the emotional scars, she chose to do good. It wasn't for recognition. It wasn't to show anyone. It was because, deep down, she believed that the world needed more people like that. After a few minutes, the lady opened her eyes, still confused, but with a look of gratitude that Naomi would never forget in her life. She tried to say something, but her voice failed. Naomi smiled, with tears in her eyes, and said softly, "Stay calm. The important thing is that you're okay now." She stood up with difficulty, brushed the dust off her skirt, and even with her body screaming for rest, she walked away, without waiting for thanks, without wanting applause. What Naomi had no idea was that from afar, someone was watching everything. A man, simple, almost invisible to everyone there, was standing, leaning against a post, watching every detail of that scene. He saw, when she gave up her own water, saw the jokes, saw the way she kept quiet, and he also saw the strength she hid behind that tired smile. He didn't know Naomi, but at that moment, something inside him awakened, and this is where the story begins to take a turn that she never, not even in her wildest dreams, could have imagined. Because what Naomi did that day seemed like just a small gesture, but it was exactly that gesture, that detail, that completely changed her destiny. But calm down. I'll tell you what happened, and you'll understand why. Sometimes, when we least expect it, life takes that turn that makes it all worth it. If your heart ached with Naomi's story, it's because she's part of that group of people who still believe in the power of kindness. People who truly feel, who cry, who rebel, who root for happy endings, and who know that deep down, every act of love can change a destiny. This is the place for those who are thrilled by stories like this, for those who love to feel, learn, and believe that life can always surprise. So come and be part of this community that values every emotion, every tear, and every smile that these stories bring. Like now, and subscribe to the channel, because the next stories will touch your heart even more. What Naomi didn't know was that that simple act of kindness, that decision to share the last drop of water with a stranger, wouldn't end there. The truth is that, in that small neighborhood full of mean looks, everything became a reason for comment. And of course, with her, it wouldn't be any different. As soon as she got up from the floor, still with shaky legs, trying to find the strength to continue the day, the jokes started. The first one to open his mouth was Mr. Okoro, the owner of the store on the corner. You know, that kind of bitter person who seems to enjoy putting others down. Well, that was Okoro. He came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a dirty cloth, and without the slightest care, shouted loudly for everyone to hear, "That girl is a fool. She doesn't even have anything for herself, and she still wants to play the Good Samaritan." His mocking tone was so loud that even those on the other side of the street stopped to look. Some people laughed, others just nodded as if they agreed with him. Naomi felt her face burn, not only from the heat, but from shame. She took a deep breath, swallowed her tears, and kept walking, as if she hadn't heard. But inside, it was like a knife stab. And do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't just Mr. Okoro's comment. She looked around and saw that no one, absolutely no one, came to her defense. Not a single look of support, not a single gesture of solidarity. People just accepted it, as if he was right, as if helping someone was a reason to be laughed at. A neighbor even commented out loud just to make sure she would hear, "Then she'll be knocking on our door asking for food. I want to see if the old lady she saved. We'll give her something." Another, laughing, said, "Naomi was born to be a fool. She's always been like that. She helps everyone and remains in poverty." Each word was like a punch. She quickened her pace. She wanted to disappear from there. She wanted to get home soon, if you could even call it home. A small room with leaking ceilings and peeling walls. But it was the only place where she could hide for a while from that world that always seemed ready to hurt her. As she walked, her head was a whirlwind. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that she did the right thing, people's voices echoed, hammered, as if they were trying to convince her otherwise. Why help? Nobody ever helps you. You'll continue in this life, always being the silly girl who worries about others and forgets about yourself. And to make matters worse, the heat seemed to increase with each step. Her body no longer responded properly. Her mouth was still dry, her eyes were burning, and her stomach empty. But even so, even with all that avalanche of humiliation deep down, there was a part of her that still believed that doing good was worth it. But what she didn't know was that the humiliations of that day were far from over. Little did she know that Mr. Okoro's comment would become the talk of the entire village. In that neighborhood, everything that happened spread like wildfire. In a matter of minutes, the story had already been distorted, exaggerated, and spread. To every corner, they were already saying that Naomi had given the water just to show off, that she wanted attention, that she was doing it just so she could later beg for money from others. And believe me, there were people who went even further. A neighbor, Mrs. Amara, known for caring more about other people's lives than her own, even invented a story that Naomi was doing it on purpose to get some benefit, that she was trying to make a scene to move someone. Soon she'll be in front of the church, telling her story, just to see if someone will give her a food basket, she said, laughing with other women sitting on the sidewalk. While all this was happening, Naomi, already inside the house, tried to hold back her tears. Sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, she looked at the ceiling and thought, why? Why does it always have to be like this? Why does doing the right thing hurt so much? She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prayed in her mind, as she had done so many other times. God, just give me the strength to continue, because it's so hard. And what she didn't know is that while she was saying this silent prayer, on the other side of the street, someone was still watching every move. Someone who had seen everything, from the moment she knelt down to help until now, watching her walk back home with her shoulders slumped and her gaze lost. Someone who was there, for a reason she couldn't even imagine yet. What was that man planning? Why did he seem so attentive to everything that happened to Naomi? Why, on that particular day, did he choose to pass by there? Calm down. I'll tell you soon. Because what will happen in the next few hours will make Naomi understand that every tear, every humiliation, and even every cruel word she heard were about to gain an answer that no one, absolutely no one, in that village was expecting. The next few hours seemed like an endless punishment for Naomi. You know that feeling when everyone is talking about you, even when you pretend not to hear? That was exactly how she felt. It was like the entire village had decided to turn their backs on her all at once. Naomi had barely stepped foot in the door of her house when she could already feel the stares. Some were hiding their eyes, others weren't even that careful. The jokes came from all corners, from the group of women sitting near the grocery store, from the men playing dominoes on the sidewalk, even from the children who repeated what they heard from their parents. That's why you live in poverty, always helping others and forgetting about yourself. This was one of the phrases that hurt the most. It came from Mrs. Amara, the same one who always loved to add fuel to the fire. She said it loudly to make sure Naomi would hear while washing clothes in the sink in front of the house. Some people laughed, others just shook their heads, but no one, absolutely no one, tried to defend her. Naomi quickened her pace. She pretended she was in a hurry, but the truth is she just wanted to escape that heavy environment. At every corner, a new accusation disguised as advice. That girl needs to learn to take care of her own life. Help everyone and look at her situation. Do you think you're going to change the world with a bottle of water? She thought about responding, about screaming, about letting it all out. But no, she took a deep breath, held back the urge to explode, and continued on her way. As much as her chest hurt, she didn't want to feed that gossip circle any further, because that's what those people wanted, to see her reacting, losing control, giving them a reason to talk even more. But inside, her head was a hurricane. The memories of that moment in the square came back like a repetitive movie. The fallen lady, the water, the laughter, the mean comments, and now the harsh judgment of the people she had known since she was a child. Because that was the problem. Naomi wasn't hearing these words from strangers. They were neighbors, people she had grown up with, people who had asked her to borrow sugar, who had knocked on her door to ask for help when they needed it. And now they were all there, condemning her, as if being good was an unforgivable mistake. Each sentence came like a slow poison. That's why she's always starving. People like that never get ahead. She just likes to suffer. She can't help but... Naomi wanted to cover her ears. She wanted to disappear. The worst part is that a part of her started to believe those voices. And when we start to believe the bad things they say about us, everything gets heavier. But what Naomi still had no idea is that someone was paying attention to every word that was being thrown at her. And that person was already beginning to draw up a plan that would soon turn her life upside down, in a way that no one in that village was prepared to see. But before it, there was still more humiliation coming, and Naomi was going to have to go through one of the worst moments of her life before seeing any light at the end of that tunnel. While Naomi tried to escape the sharp looks and comments, there was someone there in the middle of all that confusion who wouldn't take his eyes off her. No one understood his presence, and maybe that was exactly the intention. Francis was like that, invisible when he wanted to be. A simple-looking man, thin, with sunburned skin, sandals almost undone from so much use, a faded t-shirt that had seen better days. He could easily pass for just another one of the many humble workers in the region. The people who passed by him barely paid attention. Some looked away. Others just walked past him as if he were part of the landscape. After all, who would care about a man in old slippers, sitting in a corner of the square with a distant look in his eyes? But what no one knew, what no one even imagined, was that behind that ordinary face, there was a story that would leave anyone speechless. Francis was not just another resident, nor a beggar, nor a street vendor. He was nothing more, nothing less than one of the richest men in the region, a true African millionaire, owner of companies, lands, and businesses that many people there dreamed of working for one day. But why would a man like that be there, like that, sitting in the square, wearing worn-out clothes, pretending to be someone ordinary? That was something only he knew. Francis had his own reasons for living in disguise, observing, testing, seeing with his own eyes what people really were like when they thought no one was looking. That was what he had been doing for years, showing up in places where no one expected, without announcing, without security, without fancy cars, just him and the naked truth of the people around him. That day, Francis had left one of his farms early, deciding to walk around the city as he did from time to time. He liked to smell the earth, to listen to the street conversations, to observe the attitudes that no one showed when they were in front of someone important. And when he turned the corner of the square, it was impossible not to notice Naomi kneeling on the ground, holding that little bottle of water, sharing it with a fainting lady. He stood still, watching, without saying anything, just taking in every detail. He saw the way she hesitated for a second, but still chose to help. He saw the malicious laughter that followed, the cruel comments, the unfair accusations. Francis, with her serious gaze, felt his heart tighten, because he knew that kind of judgment well. He himself, years ago, had gone through similar situations, when he was still just a boy in holy slippers, working from dawn to dusk to help his mother put food on the table. And now, there he was, years later, a millionaire, powerful, with enough money to never have to look back. But even so, he carried within him this mania of going back and observing those who still had a heart, even in the worst conditions. And Naomi, that day, had shown him exactly the type of person he admired, someone who, even with a whole life telling him to give up, chose to do good. As Naomi walked past him, with her head down, with her eyes still full of shame and sadness, Francis just followed with his eyes, in silence, but with a decision forming in his head. He knew it wasn't the right time yet. He knew he needed to wait, observe a little longer, understand better who that woman was. But deep inside him, he was already certain of one thing. Naomi, without knowing it, had just changed her own destiny. What she did in that square, the simple gesture, the courage to face rejection, all of that had already left a mark on him. And what Francis would do from there was just the beginning of a turnaround that not even in her best dreams Naomi could imagine. But calm down. There's still a lot to happen, because before life smiles at her, there are still more trials on the way, and the next step in this story will touch the hearts of those who are following even more. The next day, the sun hadn't even started to warm up yet, and Naomi was already out on the street, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed to find something to do, some job, some way to earn some money to buy at least a loaf of bread. The night before had been long, the kind where you toss and turn in bed, your head full of thoughts that never stop. She barely slept. She kept remembering the looks, the laughter, the cutting phrases she had heard, all of that hammering away in her mind like echoes that were impossible to silence. But what she didn't expect was that the same man she had barely noticed the day before, that Francis, would cross her path first thing in the morning. He appeared suddenly, as if he didn't care, walking slowly, wearing the same old flip-flops, the same faded t-shirt, and a look that Naomi couldn't decipher at first. When she saw him coming towards her, her first reaction was to prepare herself for another scolding, or maybe another judgment. In her mind, everyone there seemed to have become experts at criticizing, but what happened was completely different. Francis stopped right in front of her, adjusted the holy cap he was wearing, and in a low, hoarse voice and said, "Miss, I just wanted to thank you." Naomi was confused at the time. Thank you? Why? She didn't remember having done anything for him. Before she could answer, he continued, and now with visibly teary eyes, "Yesterday, when you helped that lady, even with so little, even with everyone laughing at you, I saw everything, and I wanted to tell you that the world needs more people like you." At that moment, time seemed to stop. Naomi felt her body freeze, as if that sentence had touched a place that she herself had forgotten existed. It had been so long since anyone had recognized anything good in her, that hearing those simple words, and but so true, was like receiving a hug after years of loneliness. She tried to hide it. She gave a half-hearted smile, and said with a choked voice, "Ah, I just did what anyone would do." But the truth is that she knew it wasn't just anyone, because everyone there had seen it, and no one, absolutely no one, had done what she did. Francis shook his head, as if he disagreed, and then asked a question that took Naomi by surprise. "But Why? Why did you help her, even with so little? The question hung in the air, and Naomi, for a second, thought about giving a quick answer just to end the subject, but something in that look in Francis's eyes, in that calm voice, made her open her heart a little. I don't know, she began, looking at the floor, trying to hold back the tears that were already wanting to fall. I think I've been in her shoes. You know, I've been hungry. I've passed out on the street. I've been ignored. And I know how it hurts to look from one side to the other and see that no one cares. It's not about what we have. It's about not letting others suffer. If we can do something, even if it's small. Francis stayed quiet, just staring at her, as if every word was a confirmation of everything he already suspected. He knew a good heart when he saw one, and Naomi, in that moment, had shown him exactly that. The two of them stood there for a few minutes, in silence. It wasn't that heavy. Silence. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that seems to say everything without needing any more words. Francis then put his hand in his pocket, took out a coin, handed it to her, and said, "It's not much, but maybe it will help in some way." Naomi hesitated, but accepted it, more because of his kindness than for the coin itself. What she never imagined was that this would be just the first of many encounters between them, because from that moment on, Francis decided that he would no longer just observe from afar. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand who this woman was, who, even with so little, still had so much to give. But what he was planning was still a mystery, one of those that, when the truth comes out, no one can believe. But before that, there were still more trials coming for Naomi, and life, as always, was going to test once again the strength she didn't even know she had. Naomi barely had time to digest that conversation with Francis. The emotion was still stuck in her throat, that strange mix of shame, gratitude, and that little thread of hope that was beginning to emerge deep in her chest, as if, for the first time in a long time, someone was looking at her in a different way, as someone who was worth something. But of course, as always happens in her life, the peace didn't last long. She hadn't even taken 2 steps after Francis walked away, and the whispers had already started. First they came in whispers, the kind that pretend to be discreet but are meant to hurt. Then the ironic smiles. And when she passed by the group of women who were always leaning on the sidewalk, it turned into public humiliation. "Now you want to save a beggar too, Naomi? For God's sake!" The voice was that of Mrs. Amara herself, who seemed to live only to throw poison. At the same time, the others started laughing. One of them added, "Soon she'll be bringing him to live with her, to take care of him, bathe him, and who knows, get married. Right? That's all that's left now." The laughter grew even louder. The men who were playing dominoes on the corner didn't miss the chance to make fun of them either. One of them shouted, "Oh, look there, Naomi's new crush, the couple of the year, the princess and the pauper." Another added, "Although the way she likes to help, it might just work out." Naomi felt her face burn, her heart raced, her hands were shaking. She looked back quickly and saw Francis ahead, walking away, walking with that calm manner, seemingly oblivious to everything, but she was sure he had heard it too, and that only increased her embarrassment even more. The worst part is that at that moment Naomi was torn. A part of her wanted to run home, lock herself in her room and never leave. The other wanted to go back, face each of those people, and scream everything that had been stuck in her throat for years. But as always, she chose the path she knew. She lowered her head, took a deep breath, and kept walking as if it had nothing to do with her, but the words kept echoing. She knew that in the minds of those people, she was nothing more than a poor thing. And now, on top of everything, she was becoming a laughingstock because of a man who, in everyone's eyes, was just another wanderer with no future. Little did they know who that man really was. Little did they know that the beggar they mocked so much had a surname that, if they heard it, they would choke in fright. And the most ironic thing of all is that Naomi, at that moment, still had no idea what was coming. What she thought was just another difficult day was about to turn into the beginning of the biggest turnaround of her life. But before that, fate had yet another setback in store, because, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, the suffering wasn't over yet, and what was about to happen would test again how far Naomi's heart could stand being hurt before finally receiving what she so deserved. Naomi's body had already been giving her signs, but as always, she ignored them. I was used to feeling weak, dizzy, and that headache that seemed to never go away. It was as if my whole life was spent constantly trying not to fall. But that day, things went even further. The sun seemed even more cruel than on other days. The air was hot, dense, and hard to breathe. Naomi had already woken up with a bitter taste in her mouth, a dry throat, and her legs so weak they could barely support her own weight. But even so, she left the house, because in her head, staying there, lying in that stuffy room, wasn't going to solve anything. She needed to try, somehow, to find a job, to sell something, anything that would bring in some change to at least buy food and water. The problem is that the body has limits, and hers was already beyond bearable. Naomi could barely walk to the central square. Her head was spinning. Her eyes were burning. Her vision was starting to get blurry, as if the world around her was slowly fading away. She tried to hide it. She sat on a bench for a few minutes, but her hands were shaking, her heart was racing, and sweat was running down her face. And then, suddenly, everything went black. She fell to the ground, right in the middle of the square, in front of everyone. She fell hard, with a thud that made some people turn to look. But you know what was worse? No one, absolutely no one, ran to help. People looked, some even looked shocked, but soon went back to what they were doing. Some continued chatting, others continued shopping, some even crossed their arms and said out loud, "See, he's always trying to save others, and now he doesn't even have the strength to stand up." Donna Amara, as always, didn't miss the chance to throw more venom. God forbid, that girl only knows how to make a scene. In a little while she'll get up as if nothing had happened, always wanting to draw attention. Another neighbor said, laughing, "Now I want to see if a beggar will come and help her." And the laughter continued, as if it were a spectacle, as if her suffering was a public joke. Naomi, unconscious, without knowing anything, was there, lying on the floor, as if she were invisible, as if she were just another problem thrown in the middle of the street. But what no one there knew is that someone who was paying attention to every detail, had seen everything from afar. And this person, unlike the others, wasn't just going to stand there and watch, while everyone continued with their lives, ignoring her body there on the ground. Francis, the man everyone thought was just another wanderer, began to approach with firm steps and with a clear decision in his eyes. What he would do from that moment on would start to change everything, not just for Naomi, but for every person who laughed, who judged, and who, very soon, would have to eat every word they said. But before I tell you what happened, let me prepare you, because the turnaround that comes after this is not one of those that is easily forgotten. The next day dawned differently, and it wasn't just the temperature which seemed milder after days of punishing sun. It was as if the air in the village had suddenly changed. People were restless, whispering in corners, looking at the dirt road that cut through the neighborhood as if they were waiting for something. And they really were. Early in the morning, before 8 in the morning, the first sign that something strange was going to happen was the noise of engines. It wasn't just any noise, it was the heavy sound of big cars, powerful engines that the entire village wasn't used to hearing. When the first shiny black car appeared at the entrance to the community, People were already coming out of their doors to watch. When the second, third, and fourth arrived, with tinted windows and security guards getting out, it was as if the entire neighborhood had frozen. "My God, what is that?" shouted Mrs. Amara, her face pressed against the window, almost knocking down the curtain with curiosity. Mr. Okoro left the open shop with the candy and change on the counter and went to the sidewalk, his mouth open. The children, who had been playing ball in the street until then, dropped everything and ran to see it up close. And then, in the middle of that scene of confusion and wide eyes, the door of one of the cars opened. The first to get out was a huge security guard in a black suit, sunglasses, with the look of someone who wasn't joking around. Right behind, two more, the same size, with the same serious look. And last came him, Francis. But it wasn't the Francis they knew from the square, that thin man with holy slippers and a faded t-shirt. No, the man who got out of the car now was someone else. Impeccable suit, silk tie, shoes shining as if they had been polished that same morning. His hair was well cut, his beard was clean-shaven, and his gaze, his gaze was the same, only now, with a firmness that made even the most talkative people in the village swallow hard. People started poking each other. "Is that him? It can't be the same guy. Am I going crazy, or is that Francis? Oh my God, was the beggar a millionaire all along?" While everyone was trying to understand what was happening, Naomi, who was still recovering from the previous day's fainting spell, slowly opened her eyes. She was still lying on a makeshift mattress that a kind neighbor had placed for her on the porch of her house. Her body was weak, her head was spinning, but her eyes, as soon as they focused, saw the most unbelievable scene of all. Francis, standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by luxury cars, security guards, and dozens of curious onlookers. Her heart started racing at that moment. She blinked several times, thinking it was a hallucination, that she was dreaming, that the heat had made her see things. But no, it was real, and it was only was. When he took a few steps towards her, with that same look, now more confident than ever, that Naomi began to understand that something very big was about to happen. The silence in the village was almost total. All you could hear was the sound of the wind rustling the leaves on the trees, and the murmur of people trying to contain their surprise. And then, with a firm, loud voice, the likes of which no one there had ever heard before, Francis looked at all the residents who were standing there, and said, "Before anything, and I want everyone to know, that this woman who many here have mocked, humiliated, and judged, is the noblest person I have met in this village." People began to exchange looks of shame, of fright, and of pure shock. And what he was going to do next, that yes, would leave every mouth silent, and every poisonous tongue speechless, because what was coming now was just the beginning of a turnaround that no one there, not even in their best or worst dreams, had imagined seeing one day. The silence that fell after those words was almost deafening. You know that kind of moment when it feels like time stops? That's exactly what happened. The neighbors, who just minutes before had been laughing, whispering, pointing, were now there, standing, with red faces, mouths half open, not knowing whether to look at Naomi, Francis, or the luxury cars parked there on the dirt road. Francis took a few more steps forward, stopped right in the middle of the village, and with a calm that only someone who has total control of the situation can have, he took a deep breath and said, with a voice that echoed like thunder, "Today, whoever made fun of her will learn a lesson. Kindness always comes back." The words hit like a collective punch. Some swallowed hard, others looked away, and there was even someone who started to walk backwards, as if they wanted to disappear from there. But it was too late. Francis was there, and now, with all the attention focused on him, there was no way to escape. I saw every laugh, every comment, and every look of contempt. I saw the way you treated her, how you talked about her, how you judged her. I saw when she fell here, on this floor, and no one, absolutely no one, was able to reach out. I saw when you called her a fool, a wretch, a fool for helping someone in need. As he spoke, some people began to lower their heads, as if they were being scolded by an angry father. And the truth is that it was just that. Francis wasn't there just to talk. He was there to teach. While you laughed at her, I watched everything, and do you know what caught my attention the most? She, with so little, hungry, thirsty, with the whole world against her, still chose to help someone. And you chose to laugh, you chose to point, you chose to turn your backs. Mrs. Amara, who until then had been the most talkative of all, now had her face buried in her hands, trying to hide behind the wall of the house. Mr. Okoro, the same one who had shouted loudly in front of everyone, was now just rummaging through his pockets, pretending to be looking for something. But the truth was that he just wanted to hide his embarrassment. Francis took another deep breath, looked straight at Naomi, who was still there, not quite believing what she was seeing, and said, "But today, that changes. Today, she will get the recognition she deserves." And as if that were the starting signal for a new stage, Francis snapped his fingers, and one of the security guards approached, carrying a small wooden box. He opened the box right there, in front of everyone, and inside was the key to a house, brand new, painted white, with big windows, just like Naomi had always dreamed of having one day. "This is for you, Naomi, because those who sow good reap good." The repercussion was so great that some people simply couldn't hold back their tears. Some of the more sensitive neighbors started crying out of shame, others out of regret, and even the toughest ones stood there, motionless, with tears in their eyes, not knowing what to say. But Francis' lesson didn't stop there. He turned to the neighbors again, and before getting into the car, he left one more sentence, one of those that echoes in the head of those who hear it for a long time. "Next time someone falls here, think twice before turning your back, because life takes turns that you can't even imagine." With that, he got into the car, leaving. Behind him, a silence full of reflection, shame, and a Naomi with her heart racing, trying to understand how her life had changed so much in such a short time, and what was going to happen in the next few days. That was just the beginning, because Francis's gift still had many other surprises in store, and Naomi was about to discover that destiny still had much more in store for her. Naomi could barely process everything that was happening. She was still there, standing, with her hands shaking, her heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of her mouth. The people around her, who had been mocking her until yesterday, were now silent, some with their heads down, others staring at the ground, as if the weight of shame was too great to raise their eyes. But Naomi, she could only look at Francis, trying to understand if all of this was really real, or if it was just another one of those dreams she used to have, the ones that ended before the happy ending. Francis, with that firm but at the same time tender look, approached her with a discreet but genuine smile. He took an envelope out of his pocket, and inside, it wasn't just the key to the new house. There was also a letter, written in his own handwriting, offering her a steady job at one of his companies, a decent position with a salary, benefits, and the chance to finally build the life she had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. Naomi opened the envelope with trembling hands. She read it over and over, unable to believe it. Her eyes filled with tears, her knees gave out, and when she realized it, she was already on the floor, crying, sobbing, like a child who spends a long time holding in pain and suddenly breaks down all at once. The tears ran down hot, washing not only her face, but all the hurt, all the humiliation, all the no's that life had given her. And when she thought she had already received the biggest surprise of her life, Francis looked at her again and said something that made her heart race even more. "And there's more. The lady you helped that day is already hospitalized, receiving all the treatment she needs, at my expense. She's going to be fine. And all of this, thanks to you." Naomi brought her hands to her face. She could barely contain her tears. It felt like the world had turned upside down, but this time, in her favor. For a moment, she remembered all the nights she cried alone, asking God for an answer, a way out, a sign that of this would pass. And now, there on her knees, in the middle of the street, with a house key in one hand and the job letter in the other, she had the confirmation she had been waiting for. God had heard her. The reward had finally arrived. The neighbors who had been laughing before were now crying too. Some, embarrassed, even tried to get closer, but Naomi, at that moment, just wanted to feel that victory in her own way. She hugged the key to her chest, took a deep breath, and looked up at the sky, as if silently thanking for that miracle that had just happened in front of everyone. Francis, before leaving, still turned to her and said, with that calm and confident tone that only he had, "This is just the beginning, Naomi. Life still has much more in store for you." And there, at that exact moment, she understood that everything she had experienced up until that moment, every tear, every humiliation, every time she heard that she wasn't going to make it, everything had served to lead her exactly to that point. But what she didn't know yet was that destiny still had more surprises in store, and what was to come would shake up not only her life, but the entire village where she had learned the hard way that you should never underestimate a kind heart. And in the midst of all that emotion, while Naomi still held the key to her new house with trembling hands and felt the warmth of the job letter pressed against her chest, a certainty began to grow inside her. It was as if suddenly all the prayers said in the silence of the early morning, all those conversations between her and God, there, lying on the simple bed, with tears streaming down her face, had finally been heard. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't luck. This was an answer. You know, when we spend so much time asking ourselves, why me? Why so much pain? Will life ever look at me? Well, Naomi had already asked all these questions, many times in fact, but in that moment, with Francis there with the entire village as witnesses, it was clear God saw her heart. He saw every choice she made, every time she chose to help, even when she was hungry, even when she was thirsty, even when she had almost nothing. Divine justice, as always, came at the right time. Not before, not after, but at the exact moment when she needed an answer the most. And the most beautiful thing of all is that this answer came in a way that no one in that village expected. It came from the hands of the one they themselves despised, the one they called a beggar, the one they didn't even say good morning to. And looking at all that, at her own story, at every tear shed, Naomi took a deep breath and felt, perhaps for the first time in a long time, an enormous peace invade her chest, the certainty that, yes, it is worth being good, it is worth choosing to help, even when the whole world seems to say otherwise. So, if there's one thing this story taught us as a lesson, it's that you should never, never, ever underestimate an act of kindness, because what seems small, what seems insignificant, could be the beginning of the greatest miracle in someone's life. And sometimes, that someone could be you. If this story made your heart race, brought a lump to your throat, or even brought a tear to your eye, it's because it spoke to you in a special way, because deep down, everyone carries a Naomi inside them. That part that dreams, that suffers in silence, but that believes that one day life will change. So look, the like that you see on the video now is more than a click. It's almost like saying, this touched me, and it can touch other people too. And when the subscribe button on the side is activated, It's like opening space for more stories like this to reach you, and who knows, it might even change your day again. Now, tell me in the comments, what was the word that stuck in your head the most after all this? Leave it here. Gratitude, because that's exactly what Naomi is feeling right now, and maybe you are too. Oh, and before I go, there's one more thing. Naomi's story has taken this turn, but there's still a lot that can happen. So if you want to know what fate has in store for her, comment below part 2, because, depending on the number of comment, the sequel may come sooner than you think. And take advantage now, because the video that is appearing on the screen now is one of those stories that will touch your heart even more. An even more intense situation, a bigger twist, and an ending that, honestly, no one expects. So click here, and let's continue feeling together, because the best is yet to come.